Well, hi guys, it's that time. It's our Bible teaching snippet of the day. Well, today I want to just set back in on my teaching on the tithe. And I want to always start by saying that not everybody has to agree with me. If you want to give 10%, 20%, or 100% of whatever earnings you have to anybody you want to give it to, that's between you, your spouse, your family, and God. And it doesn't matter to me. What I am teaching is what is biblical and what's in the new covenant, what has been put to rest, and whether it's actually legal, biblically legal, for us as leaders in Christianity to demand a tithe. Okay? And I would submit to you that it is not new covenant. Jesus didn't teach it. The writers didn't teach it in the New Testament. Nowhere in the New Testament. None. And that's because Jesus fulfilled the old covenant and set it aside, and with his own blood, he ratified and implemented a new agreement, a new covenant, okay? So, but what we want to do is we want to resurrect the tithe to get money, because we can't trust people just to give out of the goodness of their heart. So we have to force them and guilt them into giving us 10% of their money so we can make sure that we pay the church bills, okay? Now, yesterday I taught you about where the concept, the idea of a tithe 10% came from. And believe it or not, I'll throw this in today. The tithe comes from the Babylonian Empire. Where did the Babylonian Empire begin? Well, that's in Genesis chapter 10, and this is verse 8. And it says, "And Cush begot Nimrod, and he became to be a mighty one in the earth." And it says, "And he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord." Okay? Now, here's the next sentence. It says, "And the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel." Okay. Then we see in chapter 11 the Tower of Babel, where Nimrod is the king of the land. He's the one, Nimrod's the boss, and he's building this tower because he's going to be equal to God. That's how powerful Nimrod became in the land, okay? Now, when God scrambled their languages and people spread out, that's when all the kingdoms basically started popping up. And for people to live in these certain territories of the kings, they had to pay 1/10 to live in that protected area of that king. That's where we see in Genesis 12:10 and Jasher chapter 15:8, where Abram, who came from the Babylonian Empire, from Ur of Chaldees, God told him to leave the land, to get out of there, away from all of those pagan people, right? So he leaves that land, but he brings with him certain concepts and understandings about kingdoms and how they work. Now, so that's why we see him giving a 10th of his belongings and all of the caravan of people with him to the king of Egypt, because there is a famine in the land, and now he needs a place for all these people to live where they're not going to starve. So they get there and they give, the minute they get to the gates, the king's men stop him and say, "Hey, you give us 1/10 of everything that you have with you, and now, after you do that, you can enter into the gates and live here. But you're going to pay to come through these gates and live here in this kingdom." Okay, so he did. Now here I want to add something kind of neat in here, okay? The book of Jasher actually goes into talking about how they tried to hide Sarah because she was the most beautiful woman in the caravan, and that the king's men, and this is tradition, not just here in this story, but what they would do is line up all the women and pick out 10% of the most beautiful ones. They got to pick what women they carried to the king, okay? So they hid Sarah because she was the most beautiful woman, and they knew that she would be taken to the king as a concubine. Here's another problem. When they find out that her and Abram are married, they would kill Abram so she would not be a married woman any longer, and she would be free to be the property of the king. I hope that adds a little bit of interest to you on the story of Abram and Sarah and why Abram asked her to lie, and Sarah actually wanted to lie because she did not want Abram to die, okay? But they did hide Sarah so that it wouldn't be a problem to begin with, but the soldiers searched all of the king's men searched all of what Abram and his caravan had, and they found Sarah. And they, of course, did take her to the king. And we know that story so I'm just going to stop there because I need to get back on the tithe. But isn't that a very cool add-in to the story? What we see is that he understood the tithe from the Babylonian Empire, okay, and that's why he tithed to the king of Egypt, okay. And then we see him doing the same thing, honoring the king of Salem, which would be Melchizedek, and gave him 10% of the winnings of the war that he came back with when he rescued Lot. That's what I covered yesterday. Now, I want to show you in another place in the Bible where, let me find this, I've got it pulled up, where we see the word tithe. I just want to show you because not very many people teach this, but it's in here, so I just want to bring it up. Genesis 28, verse 20 and 22. This is where Jacob makes a promise, and actually he makes a deal with God. He's doing let's make a deal with God. Jacob has just stolen Esau's birthright, and now Esau is fixing to kill him. And Esau is a mighty hunter, by the way, okay? And he is going to literally take his brother out because he realizes out of him being so tired and hungry that Jacob tricked him and took his inheritance away from him. And he knows he's been snookered, and he's going to kill his brother. So Jacob's mother says, no, you must run and you must get away, go to my father's family, okay, get out of here where he can't get to you. So Jacob decides he's going to leave. So this is, let's make a deal time. And it says right here in Genesis 28, verse 20, then Jacob made a promise, a vow to God. And he said, I want God to be with me and to protect me and guard me on this journey. I want him to give me food to eat, clothes to wear, and then I can also return in peace, in safety, back to my father's house. If the Lord, watch, if the Lord does these things, then he will be my God. This stone which I have set up on its end as a pillar will be the house of God, and I will give God 1/10 of all that he gives to me. Now, I just want you to see that God did not command this to be done. This was let's make a deal, and Jacob got that from the tradition of the Babylonian Empire, and God did not tell Jacob to do it. That was just something he offered up. Because, see, God is a superior power, and he wants to fall under God's protection. So, look, if you'll protect me, take care of me, and give me what I want, I will give you 10% of whatever it is you give me, okay? I see a lot of this go on today. I hear people tell me, well, you know, if God will give me a house and a car and nice clothes to wear and plenty of food and he takes care of me and he does all the things that I want him to do, then I'm going to let him be my God and I will give him 10% of whatever he gives me. We are still, many times I see people doing the Jacob, let's make a deal in Genesis 28, guys. I really do, and it breaks my heart to see it, but I do. What the takeaway here in Genesis 28 is that I want you to see that God did not tell Jacob, he didn't tell Abram to give a tithe. That was his own doing to both of these kings, Egypt and Melchizedek. God never commanded Jacob to give him 1/10 of anything, and actually, this let's make a deal, God never responded to that and accepted the deal. So Jacob never kept up his end of the deal, and God never required that 10th to be done. Even though Jacob brought that deal to God and said, let's strike a deal, God obviously did not take him up on the deal. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here, okay, is the fact that Jesus closed out the old covenant and established a new covenant. And when we start getting into error and we want to pull that tithe out of the old covenant, which, by the way, let me stop and say this. Did you know in Exodus, when the original law was given to Moses and he comes down the mountain with the tablets, the tithe was not included in any of that? the tithe was not instituted by Moses until the establishment of the Levite priesthood, okay? And what it was is there's a storehouse where everybody brought food items, fruit, grain, and some animals were also tithed. But here's the thing, it's the provisions of the land, okay? And it was given to the Levite priesthood because those priests that were full-time priests, not all the Levites, but the Levite priests who were full-time priests did not own land, so they did not have a way to make their own provisions, which would be food. So that storehouse included 1/10 of the food provisions, and it was for the Levite priesthood to eat out of, so they would have food to eat all year long. Now watch. It's also open all the time for anyone in the community who was a widow, an orphan, which included homeless people. Anyone who did not have food to eat could go and get from the storehouse food anytime they needed it, okay? Now, there were priests there, and they did monitor who was coming and getting it, and nobody's pulling up an 18-wheeler and loading the whole thing up and driving away, okay? But it was an open door to anyone who needed food. So I guess my question today is, are we tithing food to feed people who work full-time and live full-time, by the way? They lived full-time in the temple. Are we tithing food so people who work full-time and live full-time in churches can eat? Are we keeping an open door for anybody in the community to come in every single day of the week to get any type of food item they need to feed themselves and their hungry children? Because if we're not, we're actually not operating under the commandment of God and what he said to do with that 1/10. So here's the next question I have for you as well. Well, it's not a question, but I'll phrase it that way. Where in the Bible do we see God commanding 1/10 to be given to buy land, to build buildings, to furnish a building? Did you know that the land was donated by King David? The temple was built by King David's son, King Solomon, and all of the materials was from King David and King Solomon and all the furnishings. There was not 1 penny owed on any of that. So none of the 1/10 was ever used to pay for operating expenses. That 1/10 was only commanded by God so people could eat and survive. Okay? Listen, I'm going to cut this short today, and I'll get back on here tomorrow. Tomorrow, I want to fast forward a little bit, and I want to talk to you about this book because I'm going to read some stuff to you to try to make things come together and us understand how the tithe got put into Christianity in the 8th century. I've got some really good stuff to share with you tomorrow. I love you, and I'll see you right here. Bye-bye.